The United States didn't just build a base beneath Greenland's ice, it buried the blueprint for a nuclear missile city. And when the ice began crushing the tunnels, the military walked away, leaving the remains behind. By the end, you'll know what declassified documents say Camp Century was really testing, why Denmark was kept at arm's length, and what could eventually emerge as Greenland's ice disappears. In 1959, American engineers arrived on the Greenland ice sheet with an idea that sounded impossible. They would build a city inside a glacier. Not on the ice. Not beneath it in solid rock. Inside the moving, groaning body of the ice itself. Using massive rotary plows, crews cut long trenches into the snow. They installed curved steel arches, covered them with more snow, and allowed the surface to harden above them. Soon, a network of tunnels stretched beneath the white horizon. Camp Century had heated living quarters, laboratories, a kitchen, a hospital, a communications center, a chapel, and even a barbershop. Roughly 200 people could live there, isolated from the outside world. And powering it all was something extraordinary, a portable nuclear reactor. The official story described Camp Century as a triumph of peaceful engineering. Newsreels showed smiling soldiers eating hot meals beneath the ice. Scientists drilled deep cores that would eventually help reconstruct Earth's ancient climate. To the public, this was a frozen research station. But look at the structure through a military lens. The tunnels were modular. New corridors could be cut quickly. Equipment could be transported underground. From the air, almost nothing was visible. Camp Century wasn't simply surviving beneath the ice. It was testing whether an entire military system could disappear inside it. Camp Century stood on Greenland, a territory of Denmark. And that created a problem. Denmark had publicly adopted a policy against nuclear weapons on its territory during peacetime. Yet the United States viewed Greenland as essential to the defense of North America. The Cold War had turned the Arctic into the shortest route between two superpowers. Soviet bombers, and later missiles, could cross the polar region faster than they could approach from almost anywhere else. Greenland was no longer a distant wasteland. It was the front line. So Camp Century was presented as a scientific and engineering project. Some of that work was real. Researchers studied snow, weather, construction methods, and ancient ice. But the documents tell a second story. Military planners wanted to know how quickly tunnels could be built, how they changed over time, how machinery behaved in extreme cold, and whether men could operate underground for long periods without losing effectiveness. Those questions were not merely academic. They were the questions you would ask before building something much larger. And here's the contradiction. The same ice that made the facility nearly invisible also made it dangerously unstable. Glacial ice looks permanent from a distance. Up close, it flows like an impossibly slow river. Its weight presses inward. Walls bend. Ceilings sink. Steel supports twist. Crews constantly trimmed and reshaped the tunnels just to keep them open. Camp Century was being erased by the material meant to protect it. Yet even as engineers documented the crushing pressure, military planners were imagining thousands of miles of corridors. The proposal carried an unremarkable name, Project Iceworm. Its ambition was anything but ordinary. Planners envisioned a vast network of tunnels cut across the Greenland ice sheet. Within that network, mobile launch units would carry hundreds of nuclear missiles. The projected system would cover an area comparable to a small country. Thousands of miles of corridors would connect launch positions separated across the ice. The missiles would not remain in one location. They would move, making it harder for Soviet intelligence to identify their exact positions and harder for a first strike to destroy them. From above, the installation could blend into an almost featureless landscape. This was the logic of Iceworm, hide an enormous nuclear arsenal inside geography itself. Camp Century offered the data needed to judge whether that could work. Its tunnels were a living experiment in construction, logistics, power, isolation, and ice movement. The cheerful newsreels weren't necessarily fabrications. They simply showed the part of the truth that could be shown. The full vision remained compartmentalized, studied behind classifications and buried in technical language. But before we get to what finally killed Project Iceworm, you need to understand something even stranger. The plan may have been physically enormous, but there is no clear evidence that Denmark received the complete picture before American planners began evaluating it. This is where the story stops feeling like an engineering experiment and starts feeling like a political deception. American officials understood the sensitivity of nuclear weapons in Greenland. Directly asking Denmark to approve an underground missile complex could trigger rejection, public scandal, or both. So the largest ambitions remained inside American planning channels. Camp Century could be described truthfully as a research base. It conducted research. It tested Arctic construction. It collected scientifically valuable ice cores. But those facts also provided cover for studying a concept with nuclear consequences. This is how secrecy often works. You don't always invent a false story. You select one true layer, and conceal the layer beneath it. Decades later, records and official investigations exposed the scale of Project Iceworm. What emerged was not a finished missile network. Iceworm never advanced into full deployment. But the documents established intent. Military planners had seriously examined placing roughly 600 nuclear missiles beneath Greenland's ice, supported by an underground system of extraordinary size. Camp Century was the small prototype at the edge of that vision. And then the glacier delivered its verdict. The main obstacle wasn't Soviet intelligence. It wasn't diplomacy. It wasn't even the reactor. It was the ice. Measurements from Camp Century showed that the tunnels deformed faster than planners could reasonably manage. Snow and ice pressed against the structures from every direction. Rooms narrowed. Roofs descended. Maintenance became constant. A network thousands of miles long would require endless excavation merely to prevent it from collapsing. And a mobile missile system depends on predictable routes. If corridors buckle, rails shift, or chambers close, the weapons cannot move safely. The central promise of Project Iceworm, mobility beneath the ice, was defeated by the movement of the ice itself. That was the hard payoff buried inside the technical reports. Camp Century proved that America could build a nuclear-powered city inside a glacier. It also proved that the giant missile city envisioned by Project Iceworm could not remain stable long enough to work. The portable reactor was removed in 1963. Camp Century continued operating for several more years, but by 1967, it was abandoned. The entrances vanished beneath accumulating snow. The tunnels collapsed. The ice closed over the base as if it had never existed. But the military left more than empty corridors behind. When Camp Century was abandoned, the assumption was simple: snowfall would continue burying the site, and the ice would preserve it indefinitely. So infrastructure and waste remained. Researchers have estimated that the abandoned area contains diesel fuel, wastewater, construction material, chemical contaminants including PCBs, and radioactive waste associated with the reactor's operation. The reactor itself was removed. The contaminated legacy was not entirely removed with it. For decades, the logic seemed secure. Camp Century would move deeper beneath the surface as fresh snow accumulated above. Then the climate changed. Modern research suggests that if warming continues over the long term, surface melting could eventually outpace snowfall in this region. Material once considered permanently entombed may begin moving toward the surface or entering meltwater. Not tomorrow. Possibly not for many decades. But the political problem has already resurfaced. Who is responsible for waste left by an American installation on Greenlandic territory under Danish authority? Who monitors a collapsing base sealed beneath moving ice? And what happens when the environment opens an archive governments believed was closed forever? That is Camp Century's final lesson. The ice was chosen because it could conceal almost anything. But concealment is not the same as disappearance. A secret can survive its planners, its weapons, and the war that created it. It can sit beneath the world for generations, waiting for the landscape itself to bring it back. If this broke your brain a little, subscribe. We drop one of these every week. Next, the Demon Core killed 2 scientists in 9 months.